Today I want to look at a passage of Jesus. It's a very short passage, and on the one hand, it's all about a very contemporary situation. On the other hand, I think it's got an awful lot to say to us today about this generation. So he's talking about the generation he's living in. And he says this, "But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another, 'We played the flute for you, and you didn't dance. We wailed, and you didn't mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is vindicated by their deeds.'" So I think I'd want to just give a bit of background about that. But it's looking at the fickleness of crowds, or crowds who kind of almost want an excuse not to engage. And he points out to this in contrast with John. And Jesus has a very different style from John the Baptist. John the Baptist, remember, is a guy who kind of preaches in the wilderness and is quite ascetic and, all that locusts and honey stuff. He's not going to hang around your house for a dinner party. And so when he comes, Jesus notices how people said, "Look, I don't want to live like that. He has a demon. He's neither eating nor drinking. He's not a normal guy." And then Jesus said, "Well, I'm a normal guy. In that I eat and drink with you. But you don't say, well, now we found a normal guy. We'll listen to you." No, you say, "Don't trust that guy. He's a drunken. He eats and drinks too much." So do you see how Jesus is picking up on the fact that people often try and find an excuse? They've kind of made their mind up and they don't want to listen. I thought about this the other day. I don't know if you've ever tried feeding children, but my 6-year-old son said to me, "What's for dinner today?" And I knew there was something in his tone anyway, I said chicken. He said, "Chicken? I hate chicken." Now, I know that he likes chicken. He eats chicken all the time. It's one of his favourite things. But it was just the mood he was in. Whatever I said, I could have said all his favourites. Could have said fish fingers, could have said baked beans. He would have said, "Baked beans? I hate baked beans." Because he just decided that whatever was on offer, it wasn't going to be right. And I think that is why Jesus brings into the equation the children here. Sometimes he uses children in a positive way, not here. He said, "To what shall I compare this generation?" It's like the children sitting and talking to each other in the marketplace. And notice how they're talking to each other. It's like they're kind of egging each other on to one opinion or another. And this is where I think there's an awful lot of resonance with our own life today, that we maybe try to we don't try, we're just surfing on a wave of fickle public opinion. And if you get addicted to trying to following that and trying to always be on the right side, it's going to actually make you miserable in the end, because you'll never be on the right side. And it came to me a bit with some of the sort of Black Lives Matter and anti-slavery stuff. And there's a lot of good points in that. But the students of Liverpool University decided to get rid of the name of their university hall, which is called Gladstone Hall of Accommodation, named after William Gladstone, the 19th century Prime Minister. And the thing they said against Gladstone was to do with his links to slavery. Now, in a sense, it got a real point. Two things about Gladstone. First, his family made money out of slaves. That's how his father got rich. And the second thing is, when Gladstone, who did argue for its abolition, he wasn't saying you should get rid of it, but he said you abolish them most easily and quickly by compensating slave owners for what they've done, for their loss of property. And there is something kind of morally abhorrent about this, because it legitimizes the fact that these people were being sold as property. On the other hand, it was quite a common view. It's a way of doing it and making it happen. But is that really what you got against Gladstone? I mean, here's another thing. Gladstone was passionately opposed to women voting. Why don't you kind of get rid of his name for that reason? Have you got a problem with women or something? I mean, Gladstone in 1892, quite late, he was arguing that women's that they shouldn't get the vote because the qualities of the fairer sex would be disrupted, and their delicacy would be impinged on by their temptation to get involved with the sphere of power. So this was wrong. But you're not outraged about that. But it would be outrageous if I said, oh, I don't think women have got the vote, you should have the vote. Of course, it's an outrageous opinion. But it's of its time. I mean, everyone, pretty much, in the early 19th century thought that women shouldn't have the vote. But also with Gladstone, it misses out these things. Gladstone, massively increased the votes, by millions and millions of people were opened up into the vote because of his reforms, because he thought the working man should have as much say in the country as the rich man. And there's loads of taxation reforms which are governed by the same policy, the same principle. If you go to Ireland, his attempts to introduce Home Rule could have saved so many of the problems that Ireland and Britain suffered in the 20th century. When the Palmerston led the Opium War, what a stupid thing to go to war with. This is with China about opium in the 1840s. Gladstone was speaking in Parliament against it. Gladstone, in many ways, is hugely impressive. But because he's kind of not on a tidal wave of one aspect of life. At the moment, there's a kind of virulence of a strain of condemnation. And if I'm honest, I think there's something a little bit childish about it. It's kind of egged on by the social networks in which we live. But I think it's to be guarded against. And it's not just today. Isn't that interesting when Jesus says, to what shall I compare this generation? Whatever we did, you found a reason to oppose it. You're so fickle. Yeah, well, we kind of still are. And then very interestingly, what follows from this is a passage, a tiny but which is an incredibly famous verse. Come to me, all you are the weary and carrying heavy burdens, or a heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I think there's something wise in the fact that if we keep chasing the moral compass, which is not ours, but we're just trying to follow what's being set by a mob, it leads to a kind of misery in the end. If you just follow Jesus and hang on to that, that's enough. That's enough. And that'll prevent you kind of trying to surf the impossible waves of popular opinion. And you'll actually be centred and you'll get it right.